We have the next keynote with Beth Thoren. I know she's already hearing me, so that's why I switched to English. She is recognized as an international leader and advocate. Hello, Beth. For environmental protection, and she just recently joined last year Patagonia as Director for Environmental Action, which sounds really nice. And we will hear today what she actually plans to transform at Patagonia and what her former career in environmental action looked like. Hello, Beth. How are you?
Hello. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, really nice to have you. And I would actually just listen to you and switch off my camera, and you should be ready to to talk. And if you need to share your screen or whatever, and yeah, I'm really happy to listen to your keynote.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. All right. Well, thank you for coming today and being here. I'd like to start by showing you my jacket. It looks pretty good, but it's about 10 years old. And the reason I bought this jacket was because of my brother. About 40 years ago, he bought a red puffy down jacket from Patagonia. And he sent it back to them after the first year because he took it on a fishing trip. He went commercial fishing in Alaska, and lo and behold, the jacket got ripped. Patagonia didn't ask any questions. They just sewed it back up and sent it back to him. About 10 years later, he sent it back to Patagonia. Something else was wrong with it. He sent it back to them 3 times. And now he has a jacket he loves, and he absolutely worships Patagonia. So I had no choice but to buy this jacket. And when I got a job at Patagonia about 5 months ago, he was more excited than I was. He finally felt that he had a little sister who was worth knowing. But that aside, Patagonia does those repairs and has since the 1970s because they want to drive down unnecessary consumption. And with that unnecessary consumption, the waste and the carbon footprint. So who am I? Well, I spent about 20 years in marketing, and many of those as a marketing director. I've also worked for another 10 years in the non-for-profit world. I worked saving whales on a ship in Antarctica. And then more recently, I worked for an environmental organization suing governments who weren't working on air, working on air pollution and doing what they needed to do to protect their citizens. So I have a bit of experience of both worlds, and I feel very lucky to be the Director of Environmental Action at Patagonia. So stepping into this mythical world of Patagonia, it's been really interesting. I don't know how much you know about Patagonia, but it's quite famous. According to a recent poll, it has the #1 corporate reputation in the world, which is kind of extraordinary. It's the largest supplier of fair trade apparel with the highest percentage of recycled material. On top of that, Patagonia gives away 1% of its sales to drive change. So recently, we've started a campaign backing community energy, which is when communities invest in solar or wind, and then they get the profit from that, and they use that to strengthen their community. And we love that win-win of nature and community in one, and think it's very, very powerful. The other thing that Patagonia does is that it takes political positions which most companies wouldn't go near. So for example, this past month, we advocated for a bill to stop hate crime against LGBT+ communities in Italy. So when I got into Patagonia, the thing that really surprised me as I walked around and I met people was how authentic it was. Every person I talked to me about doing more for the environment. I was chatting with our director of e-commerce, and she described the need to make every decision twice. She looks at, how do I maximize the profit? And then she has to stop and think about, okay, so how do I minimize the damage of this decision? She described it as both frustrating and exhilarating. And the funny thing is about it all is that because we act on our values and those values align with our customers, we're really quite successful. And in Europe, over the past 3 years, our sales have grown 2 or 3 times faster than the outdoor sector as the whole. And if you're looking to change your organization and integrate this kind of thing in, my advice to you is to put your purpose right at the center of the organization and have reasons to create conversations and debate about it. Because if you put it at the side of your organization, like most corporate responsibility is, one of many different things that your managers need to deliver, you're probably going to fail. So why is Patagonia here at this conference? And the reason is because it doesn't make any sense for Patagonia to be this wonderful mythical organization off in an ivory tower, because the world needs us to act together. It needs everybody to act, every government, every business, every individual to act. And so we, businesses, need to start acting together. So I'm here today to share with you Patagonia's climate journey and to ask you to join us. So let's talk about it for a bit. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And I'd like to share with you a cartoon that stayed in my mind ever since I first saw it. Now I'm going to ask Laura if you could put that up on the screen for us. Would you be able to do that?
Actually, I would, but it would take me a second. Sorry.
Okay, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe it to you rather than wait for it to go up on screen. So basically, I could give you stats, but what the cartoon shows is it shows a number of different waves. And the first wave it shows is the COVID wave. The next wave it shows is the recession wave, and these are tsunamis. And then there's a much bigger wave, which is climate change. And beyond that, there's an even bigger one, which is nature and the loss of biodiversity. Ah, there you go. Thank you, Laura. And as you look at that, and what it says at the very bottom of it is, be sure to wash your hands and all will be well. And I guess what it's asking us to do is to look ahead. We've been stuck down into COVID and say, actually, we've got some things coming at us that are really important. And climate change is one of those things. And, you know, when you think about climate change, we're at 1.2 degrees warming now. If we go to 2 degrees, we lose our coral reefs. And with it, vast numbers of fish, and with that, food for, you know, 1 billion people in the world. If we go to 3 degrees, then we lose, then our tropical forests turn to wastelands, and then, you know, people are going to move. There's going to be famine, and then there's going to be conflict. So without a doubt, climate change is the most urgent problem that we are facing. But the other thing that, and the reason why this cartoon stayed with me, was that there's something else that's lurking beyond climate change. And that's nature, and that's species. Because nature itself, it helps us with our food, our pollinator, our wild food. It is our clean water. It is our carbon absorption. There's so much that nature does for us. And at the moment, we're not really looking at that. So, you know, I was really struck by that drawing. And if you can take, Laura, you can go ahead and take that down now. So let me talk a little bit more. So if that's the problem, what are we going to do to solve it? And, you know, just like nature and climate are inextricably linked, so are the solutions. I don't think we can save ourselves as a society unless we do 3 big things. One is reimagine our economy. The other is create a fair and just society. And the third is to care for our natural world. If we forget one of those, then it'll hold us back from succeeding on the rest. And we need to do all of those 3 in order to save our world and protect our future. Reimagine our economy, create a just society, and care for our natural world. Now let's go down a level and look at what companies can do. And to answer that, I'd like to share Patagonia's climate journey with you. And the first thing to say is it's quite uncomfortable because Patagonia despite our low impact ambitions, still has a considerable footprint. And we have to constantly be honest with our customers and say, we're not there yet. We're on a journey, but we're not there. And so with regard to emissions, we were one of the first companies to make a carbon neutral commitment. And while that was very good at the time, we feel the need to raise our ambitions and see if we can commit to a target that would align with the Paris Agreement. And wow, that's been hard. Being Patagonia, we want to set a reduction target that's based in science. We want to apply it across our full supply chain, and we want to deliver. You can imagine our horror when we did the analysis and realized that even if we did everything that we could think of, which would be like slowing growth, very significantly shifting our sales to secondhand clothes, buying 100% renewable energy, changing our process, we could only get halfway to the target. Wow. Our finding was that if you're a company like us with 86% of your emissions coming from your supply chain, and you want absolute reductions to hit the 1.5 degree target, you can't do enough with your own business in order to be able to meet the targets. Even as a large successful company, we were spread across too many factories and too small a part of their business to be able to invest in or influence them. So that put us in a tough position, and we did a lot of soul searching. But we think we have eventually found a solution. We realized that if we worked with other manufacturers to inset, in other words, to jointly invest in our supply chain to get those third-party factories to reduce their emission, then we could succeed. And while this approach is not an officially approved approach, because the emissions are real, we're confident that we're doing the right thing for the planet. And that's the first myth that I'd like to address. We don't think it's possible that as an apparel manufacturer with a long supply chain, you can significantly cut carbon emissions on your own. To solve the problem, you need to work with other businesses. And I guess when you think about it, it's not that surprising. We're dealing with complex systemic problems, and we just need to realize that. So that's emissions. The next bit of the climate journey is offsetting, because we can't reduce our emissions fast enough. And so we need to offset those emissions with investments in nature. Now, when we first looked at carbon offsets, we wanted to avoid them. The quality of the offsets was very variable. And also, we saw a lot of companies that were using offsets as an excuse for not reducing emissions, and that made us really uncomfortable. But as I showed you at the beginning, nature is just another problem that's waiting to hit us after climate change. And the other really, really important thing about it is that nature can absorb 30% of the world's emissions if it's properly protected and restored. So it's absolutely a vital part of the solution for climate change. And as a result, we invested quite a bit of time in developing a very robust checklist where we look at different products, and it's got additionality in it. Is this really moving additional carbon? Is this really protecting something that is threatened? And the other piece of it is community benefit. And I think it's really important that we don't forget about that, because unless the interests of a local community around a protected area are aligned with the interests of nature, then the community will work to undermine the success of that project. And so time and time again, probably the biggest factor in nature restoration is the alignment of the community near the nature that's being restored. So that's a really important point to think about when you look at offsets. So the second myth that I want to just draw your attention to is that you can write an offset check and call it good. You can't. You have to, without a doubt, nature's absolutely part of the solution, but you have to do your homework. You have to do your research and make sure that you're spending that money well. Okay, so that's what Patagonia is doing. What would I advise you to do? Well, I believe, unsurprisingly, that the first and most important thing as a company you can do is to reduce your emissions and reduce them drastically. If you do nothing else, please do that. Just realize that you might need to work with other companies in order to be successful. The second thing you can do is that until you're able to fully reduce your emissions, You need to use high quality investments in nature to offset that carbon. Now, the third thing you can do is use your voice. You can use your voice to help reimagine the economy and help create a fairer and more just society. How you use your voice is up to you, and it depends on the purpose and values of your companies. But the key thing is that you use it. Over the past decade, our democratic systems have weakened. Governments don't lead society anymore. They hear what citizens want, and then they look to business for permission to act. This has led us on a global race to the bottom. It's up to us as businesses to speak out and lobby together, because we want to create the world in which we can operate and have businesses for years and years to come. So the choice is yours. You can wait till you're forced to change, and then you risk stranded assets, blocked supply chains, investor and legal pressure, or you can act now. Business is 75% of GDP. Not all of us will act, of course not. But if you do, and if we start working on solutions together, it's a start. And then at least we will have made it possible. We will have made it possible to protect our future and our amazingly beautiful planet. So with that, I'd like to say thank you.
Thanks a lot. I would give the virtual applause here. I actually see some applause is coming up from the audience as well. So yeah, thanks a lot for your very livable, vibrant presentation. And sorry for my late showing the slides, but yeah, we got it. It's really, really great to have you. And maybe I use the time for one question, just because we will start soonish with the main panel. But there was a question coming. You said so much about how to integrate the struggle in protecting the environment, but then also we have to reduce emissions and really look on carbon. So maybe to say, where do you put your focus? Is it really the KPI CO2? Or do you have many to get a picture of the whole environmental biodiversity, water use, and so on picture? How do you solve that? Or is that in process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we've been debating that a lot now because we've been reworking our strategy. And you know, we wondered, should we make carbon number one? And what we did is we said, carbon on its own is not enough. And it's to do with those waves that I showed you. So carbon is the most urgent priority, and it sits at the top of what we try to do. But we have a number of pillars underneath it that support us, which, you know, one is, you know, nature protection, the protection of wild spaces. And another one is looking at agriculture, because unless we address agriculture, we're not going to succeed either. And the third is looking at communities and fair and just communities. So carbon is absolutely at the top, but we're not ignoring the rest.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good answer. I think a lot of people working in that field have the struggle to okay, you have in the 17 SDGs so many goals, where to focus. I do know, Beth, you are also in our Slack community. Maybe you are around to answer some questions if people ask them in the Slack chat. And I would really invite you to stay also for the main panel. We have IKEA, Vattenfall and Bosch talking about climate goals across Europe and not only Germany. And yeah, happy to stay in touch and work on the global partnerships. So
I will be on Slack and I will be listening in very eagerly to the next session. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon then. Ciao.
Yeah.